Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our Monitor Farm Monday series and tonight's session, which is all about data management. Great to see you all here as you come in from wherever you've been or sit and join us over your dinner tonight. And maybe some of you, this might be the first session that you've been on our Monitor Farm Mondays, or maybe you've joined us every Monday night from November at 7 o'clock, and we've become a regular feature in your household. Whatever that is, we're pleased to see you tonight. My name's Teresa Meadows. I'm Knowledge Exchange Manager for AHDB in East Anglia, and it's my pleasure to be hosting tonight along with James and Laura Porter, Andrew and Sam Melton, and Harry Henderson, which I'll introduce you to in a minute. So welcome everybody. So just in our normal way as we get started, in terms of housekeeping, we can't see you or hear you sadly tonight, but we very much want you to be involved. There's a little box, if you're on the computer, it probably look like this. You can press the little orange arrow and pop out, and then you've got a questions box that's there. If you pop a question into there, Christian, who's behind the scenes, and myself will be able to see that, and that's where you can pop your basis and Oroso points or any questions or anything as well as we go through. There are a couple of handouts on there as well tonight, a couple of things that might be of interest, a research review, an audio troubleshooting guide if you have any problems with that as well. We're scheduled to be here till 8 o'clock tonight, and we've got lots of discussion and conversation with our speakers as we go through as well. The session is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to that recording because you've registered tonight, and it'll also be available on our Cereals and Oilseeds YouTube channel, of which there is a big back catalogue there as well now of videos. I think, Harry, I don't know how many you feature in, but I think you must be one of our highest grossing actors as AHDB in there. So if you like what you're seeing tonight, there's plenty more where that came from as well. We're also all on Twitter. Feel free to follow any of us or tag us in what you think tonight, and hashtag Monitor Farm connects you with other things that's going on across the network. If you claim basis and Oroso points, there are basis and Oroso points registered with tonight. If you basis, it's your name, your account number and your postcode. If you pop that in the questions box, and the same for an Oroso, but they do also ask your date of birth. If you're watching this back on the recording, if you'd like to email teresa.meadows@ahdb.org.uk, I'll make sure those points are registered for you as well. So tonight we're going to do it as a bit of a discussion as we go through tonight. There's lots to talk about in terms of data, and we've got some fantastic practitioners here with us tonight. So first up, we've got Andrew and Sam Melton. Andrew and Sam are our Wisbech monitor farmers near Cambridgeshire, and I don't know if you just want to give us a bit of a background, Andrew and Sam, to your business.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Just a bit of background. We're obviously new to monitor farms this year. It's been a bit different for us, as you all know. But just like to give you a little bit of background to what we're doing on our farm. We're farmers and contractors. So we have our own family farm, and we're contracting in the local area. So we're just sort of looking at different ways of using data and managing data to try and make our farming practices better.
Brilliant. And you're combinables, aren't you, where you are, Sam?
Yes, yeah, sorry, yeah. So what was that? Sorry, Teresa?
Combinable crops and
mainly, yeah, mainly it's combinables, yeah.
Brilliant. Welcome. And then James and Laura Porter, who are a team, joined us today from Suffolk. And James sits on the DIS Monitor Farm steering group and is often talking about the data and the improvements that he's made on farm and the areas that you've benefited from. So I'm delighted to have you both here tonight. Do you want to give us a bit of background to your farm business as well, James?
Yeah, we're also a family-run farm. We're actually third generation. We contract farm for 3 other farms as well, and yeah, looking at yield data, costings, and trying to improve soil and the bottom line, really.
Yeah, familiar terms with what we're all talking about at the moment. So yeah, brilliant to have you both here. Laura's the brains behind the business as well, James, I hear. So she's going to give us all the secrets as we go through tonight. So welcome as well, Laura. And Harry, do you want to introduce yourself if you need an introduction?
Do I? I don't know. Well, I'm Harry Henderson. So I work for AHDB across arable, which is potatoes and cereals and oilseeds. And so I do a lot of work on cost of production, cost of machinery, and kind of independent information on machinery choice and so on.
Brilliant. And so Harry's here to ask the questions tonight as we go through as well. So as our panel of speakers, I think maybe we just, before we kick off, just to give us a flavour of the things that you enjoy, what's your most important piece of data you'd say that's on your business at the moment? Sam, what would you say you really feel is useful on the farm in terms of data?
I think mainly like our data we get from the tractors over at telematics, it helps quite a lot, I think, with costings and things like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
And what we're going to talk about a lot tonight as well would be interesting. Laura, what's your favourite piece of data on the farm?
Definitely the yield data, and then being able to use the maps, so looking at the gross margin maps to see where the money is actually being spent and what parts of the field are actually profitable.
Yeah, so I know we're going to talk about that as we go through a bit later as well, and how you've been able to use that. So that's brilliant. Harry?
I love seeing a gross margin map. I think everything comes together and it's quite staggering where the field is making a lot of money and some other parts of the field are making an awful loss. And I think that's a very powerful indication about the way you manage a field and what parts of the field are worth keeping in tip-top order and some perhaps aren't even worth farming, and it can all be in the same field.
Yeah, brilliant. Andrew?
Sorry, Teresa, I didn't hear that question. I'm sorry.
You're fine. And what's your favourite piece of data on the farm?
It was, to be fair, I think some of the soil conductivity maps we've had done as well. It can, I mean, it all comes in together, but to look at the soil conductivity, which then gives us some sort of soil texture maps. We're going back and ground truthing them to look at obviously clay contents as well as nutrition. So all of that comes in, and I think it's quite important.
Brilliant. And James?
Yeah, also our variable rate seeding for us has been a very big step forward, because we're on sort of hills, and top of the hills were always lower seed counts, which has improved that. And also our boundary maps now has been a big saviour for us and just make life a lot easier.
Brilliant. I think that kind of all of those gives us a flavour of what we're going to hear about tonight, but also the different areas of data that we've all got on farm. And if you've got kind of thoughts or things that you want to put in the questions about areas that you find interesting or you'd like us to cover tonight as we go through, feel free to pop them in the questions and we'll see if we can cover them for you as we go through tonight. So if we just go to the next slide, in terms of data management, Harry, if we think about it in the wider piece, have you got some thoughts before we kick off tonight in terms of data management?
I think everyone seems to enjoy dropping into the conversation big data and assuming that the farm is generating lots of data, and all manner of companies are getting involved and taking an interest in the data that's coming off a farm, and it could be Tesco's, Morrison's, Microsoft even. And I think the point of tonight really is just to highlight the value of data to the farmer that's being generated by this screen and the tractor here you can see, and from soil maps and from vegetation maps and so on. So I think tonight is for me, it's very much about how we unite all of this data, crunch it down into something meaningful that the farmer can go away with and make changes upon receiving this data. So it is helping manage decisions rather than being something nice to have, something interesting whiling away the time in your tractor cab.
Definitely. Which is what tonight's all about. And tonight's very much come from the Monitor Farm programme. It was something that we discussed about at the DIS Monitor Farm kind of steering group, hadn't we, James? And with Andrew and Sam, with you, kind of with ideas of things we wanted to look at. And I know with a lot of colleagues around the country, the kind of request as part of the Monitor Farm to look at data management has been there, which is why we're all here. So just to kind of get your feedback then and a flavour of what's who we've got out there and what you're doing at the moment. If we just run the first first poll. Hopefully you're all well aware of how we run polls now. But if you click on the poll in front of you, and you should be able to select any of the options that apply for you. So our first question for you all tonight is, what's your current level of precision farming and data use? Are you using anything or just kind of paper-based records? Have you got GPS hands-free steering? Are you using yield mapping, variable rate fertilizer mapping, or are you doing the whole lot? You've got yield mapping, variable rate technology, you're using telematics, desktop software, it's all connected, you know, and you're quite advanced in doing that. So if you click on any of those options that apply, it'll give us a bit of an idea of who we've got in our audience tonight and what the kind of things you're doing. So I think if we reveal that Christian now, we've got 65% of you have had a chance, 70% of you have voted. So what do you think to this then, Harry? 68% of the audience tonight are using GPS-based hands-free steering. 25% of you, you know, maybe not using anything, as opposed to 26% of you that are using quite a lot. So would you say that's a fair reflection, Harry, of where we are in the industry at the moment?
Well, when you drive down the road, it's rare now to see anything less than arrow straight tram lines and drill rows and potato beds. So 68%, yeah, it's lower than I would have thought. I would have thought I would have been in the upper 70s. But yield mapping 41%, variable rate 35, and yield mapping, variable rate treatments, telematics, the whole gambit at 26%. So it's interesting, you know, when we get to the questions and answers section, to try and understand why that's at 26%. But we've got another couple of polls coming up, so that might reveal a bit more of the idea.
So if we do the next one then, Christian, out of those, and this will be interesting for you, Andrew, and Sam and James and Laura. So of those that you are using the different technology, are you analysing the data that you're collecting? So yes, you're looking at yield maps, you're using your variable rate applications, using NDVI and linking that back to yield mapping. Maybe you've got, you know, using some of the soil services, using the EC scanning, and you're looking at, you've done vari-rate P&K for a few years and you're looking at how that's changing. Or maybe you've not started yet, you know, you're collecting the data, but you're here tonight to get a few ideas on what you can do. So we've got a good percentage of you answering that. So if you'd like to show that, Christian. So we've got, so the most of you haven't started yet, but you're interested, so good to see you all here. Quite a lot of you are analysing field yield maps. Quite a lot of you are kind of looking at your soils and starting there, and then a good percentage looking at vari-rate, NDVI and yield mapping as well. So I don't know, Andrew and Sam, where did you start from those ones? Is that kind of reflection of where you started?
The earliest ones would have been yield mapping for ourselves, because it was one of the first things possibly to come out, precision farming, wasn't it, the yield mapping, closely followed probably by soil analysis and variable rate application for us.
Good, and then thank you. And then Christian, do you want to do the last poll quickly, and then we'll move on? So the question from the beginning, so do you think you're making money or savings from that yield and variable rate technology mapping that you're doing? Yes, maybe it's cost benefit neutral at the moment and you're interested in making more of it, or no, you don't see that you're making that, or maybe you haven't done those calculations. And I think, Harry, you know, it's one of the big things from tonight. I know James and Laura, it's one of your big reasons for making the most out of Gatekeeper, and the work that you're doing is making sure that you are making that money back. So if we just show that poll results. So quite interesting. Most of you, you know, you're collecting it, but is it making it pay? 28% of you definitely think it is, and 18% of you we've got to convince. So brilliant. Thank you very much. I think it gives us a good picture of who we've got out there, and hopefully by the end of tonight, all of you, whichever camp you are in, will have got some good ideas. So I think without further ado, if we hand over to Andrew and Sam, and Andrew and Sam are going to take us through their slides and their kind of thoughts about what they're doing on farm. We're going to have today's session is quite discussive and conversational as we go through. So if you've got questions or thoughts or things you're doing on farm that you want to feed in, please feel free to pop them on the questions box as we go through. So Andrew and Sam, over to you.
Okay. Just wanted to start with the next slide, please. This one really is something what we've had to deal with, and I'm sure lots of you have to deal with. Lots of files. It could be from any make of tractor, any type of machinery, but there's lots of data which we can process and obviously manage. So that's the first part of it, and we're guilty of having data, and then where do we go from there? So if you could go on to the next slide. So from the next slide, this is really just back one, just I think it was just on the sort of monitoring and evaluation slide. Oh, is this one first? Sorry.
Sorry,
this is from our Cobbler's Lane trial field for the monitor farm this year. We're looking at using shallow stroke no tillage applications, establishment methods. We've got a plough based, and we've got some cover crop in there as well to look at cover crops as well. And from that field as well, we're doing an evaluation on machinery and fuel costings and right across the board, including labour as well. So next slide, please. This is the same field. So for a start, we felt we needed a way of managing how to look at the data. So this is just one way. There's lots of software out there, but there's one way we're looking at look at our trials. You can see on the screen there. There's 5 different tramline trials there, here with direct drilled, cover crop, with straw, without straw. And we felt if we're going to take this any further, we need to look at ways of how we can look at the data. So from this map here, we can then use satellite imagery. We can look at yields going forward in those trials to see what differences we can pull out. So we felt we needed that. Even we need somewhere to put the data into. So this is something we're looking at. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so we've been using wireless data transfer for a couple of years now, and it seems to really help with record keeping, and just basically it just makes the whole job a lot easier. Saves going to the tractor with a USB stick and not really getting around to doing it as much. So then you get one big bundle of data probably at the end of the week rather than every single day. It's kind of just all tying into the pulling all this data in one foul swoop. Should we go on to the next slide for that, please? So this links into the My John Deere for our tractors, and we can get all kinds of data, like anything we need really. We've got on this one, we've got fuel consumed over a specific period of time, which you can vary and choose between fields and separate times over the day. That's that for that one, please. Next slide. This is basically a brief overview of like all the data you can get through this software, and some of it you might not need for the day-to-day, but it really helped with the next few slides I'm going to show with the fuel usage and overall costings. Get to the next one, please. So this is the field trials I've been looking at with the costings and the fuel rates over the trials that we did from the first slide. So I've got fuel used and the work rates. So it kind of all ties in together. And
yeah, you pulled all this data, didn't you, from My John Deere? So each of the fuel consumptions and the work rates were coming from real-time data from My John Deere. So we use those, including the fuel, and then for the next slide works on to the machinery costings.
Yeah, that brings in the costings of. Let's wait for it to go over to the next slide.
Next slide, please.
This works in with Farm Bench as well. So we have the labour costings and the machinery costings. It's just an overview of like a rough establishment cost of each separate trial we've done, and hopefully with the software we've got where we can zone out each part of the field, when it comes to yield data, we can hopefully compare them in the future.
Next slide, please. Do you want to?
If we just go back to that, because I think that's really interesting, Harry, isn't it? When we're looking at doing trials and things like that, and how we kind of make the most of doing work. Is that something that you've looked at doing before, and is that an advantage of the telematics? Did it take you a while, Sam, to put it together, or?
It took a little while, but nothing extraordinary. It was something new to me. It's the first time I've really done it, so it took half an hour or so, but nothing major, and it's definitely going to be worth it in the long run, in my opinion.
I think it'll be good for working out sort of more real-time costings. As say, we used it in conjunction with the machinery costings for farm bench, and I think we've got some good figures there to pull. We've used the data to work out real-time costings on our own farm, which is always, we can always look at assumptions, but if we've got this data there, we may as well use that to work out the costs. Yeah.
And Andrew, can you get a fuel use per field and a fuel use map from My John Deere, or is that coming?
Yeah, so we've on the slide there, we've got a harvesting fuel usage there. So this is fairly new to us, new out this year. So you can look at fuel usage per field, as you can see there, the sort of the different colours, and it actually quite correlates to actually the density of the biomass of the crop as well in the field. So how we can use this, it's obviously we need to use the fuel data. So that's one way, and then we've got a slide on the right-hand side, which just thought I'd put it up there. It was a subsoiling work we did on some headlands and some tram lines. Sorry, it's not very big, but that was basically on this one. You can pull out data such as your average speed in the field as you're working through the field. So, potentially we could use this in the future to look at compaction issues in the field, across the field. It's not something we've done as yet, but it's some real good data there showing where probably parts of the field probably need a little bit more attention.
There's a question for you that's come in as well from David. He said, do you, Andrew and Sam, do you know the relationship with reduced fuel costs with min-till to the yield ratio? If you just go back a slide, Christian, that would be great, because I think this will be interesting. Do you want to just talk us through where you are in the year with this one, and what your plans are doing? Because I think it'll be interesting to follow through.
I mean, we've sort of changed our technique slightly. We've been doing sort of a min-till, if you want to call it that, or shallow tillage for a little while, but with a plough-based system as well. So we're now looking to sort of see what else we can do to use such things as cover crops, shallow tillage, or right down to no tillage at all, direct drilling. And so we need to look at these figures to see what works for us. But obviously we've got to make it work in the field with establishment. So we're on our sort of early days of doing that. But this gives us the data to look at that as we're going through to see how we can make it work.
Yeah, it's our first try, so we haven't actually got yield data to put with it yet, but that's what I'm hoping to be able to pull in later on in the year. Hopefully it should show some interesting results.
And I think something, Harry, haven't we, through the Monitor Farm programme, have tried to emphasise, there's all the benefits we know with cover crops on, soil health and soil structure, and, but it's looking at the margins and looking at the cost at the end of the day, and to be able to have the data, like you say, that's really accurately produced this is, will add to that discussion, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic to be able to save this data and wirelessly transfer it to your phone or to the desktop software and analyze it still further. And I think it will be vital as payment and support systems change in the years to come. This sort of data coming in will hopefully evolve into leading to good financial decisions being made on farm.
Definitely. Just a quick question here from Christopher, saying, what are the establishment costs based on, please? So what's gone into those costs that you've added in, Sam? Just so everyone's sure.
We have fuel, labour, tractor depreciation, machine depreciation. I think is that it? Is it?
Yeah, they're the main costs. I mean, these are just instantaneous results for the field in question. They're not. For a whole farm, we've got an average across the farm, if you like, or across the different operations, but we try to just make this specific just for the one trial. So obviously you can take everything with a pinch of salt to exact figures, but it gives you a comparison between the different
on this exact field. That's what they'd roughly like where they would be, wouldn't they?
That's where they were from our workings out what we did on farm bench.
James has made a good point here, with wetter winters and standing, water on fields, do we need to revert to more ploughing? And I guess, I don't know, James, I know it's interesting, isn't it, that kind of question about, what cultivations are needed and, for the situation and kind of putting a monetary value on that. I don't know if, you know, maybe later in the day where the kind of doing the costings behind it maybe make you think about the practicalities of farming versus kind of the business minded. I don't know, Andrew, Sam, has it made you think in a different way about that?
It has. I mean, we've had a plough-based system working on our farm as well as the min-till system, but obviously we've had a lot of rain this year. It's made it hard for drilling later on, but I have to say, anything we drilled in good time, whether it's been shallow, we haven't done hardly any direct drilling, but we've done some very scratch the surface cultivations and then direct drilling in after covers and on not after covers. And with, you know, the fields are in as good an order as they were after ploughing. You know, obviously as that goes later and the conditions change, then obviously there's a balancing act there. But in the normal conditions, I know things aren't normal, but in good drilling conditions, I don't think there's a big problem with min-stroke direct drilling.
Good. So do you want to move on to your next points?
Yeah, so we've talked about that one. So yeah, so from there we've moved on to we've got here with variable rate drilling. To create these variable rate drilling maps at present, we're using conductivity maps in conjunction with the ground truth texture maps. So you can see on the right hand side we've got the conductivity, and then it's zoned into a texture map. This is mainly, I think this one just shows the clay content of the soil of that map. And it closely correlates probably with our, obviously you can see with our variable rate drilling map. So, you know, there's lots of things probably James and Laura have probably been adding other things into there. I mean, you could obviously potentially bring in yield maps and all sorts, but that's where we potentially started. I've done some work with we use a Yara N sensor. You'll see on the slides in a minute. We use an N sensor for variable rate nitrogen application. And from there, that creates a biomass map. So I have actually used, as a trial, some biomass maps to create establishment maps or variable rate drilling maps as well, which I think have quite a good correlation as well. So if we can move on to the next slide there. So this is this software again, which we're looking at. There's lots of different software out there for probably evaluation. It's sort of moving away. We use Gatekeeper as our crop recording. We do obviously put all the data into there as best we can. But we're also looking at this other piece of software, and it may be a way of looking at NDVI maps in there to look at what potential we have going forward going forward to harvest. And on the right hand side, this is obviously after some harvested fields. You can rank them in order of timings. You can set your profiles where you want to be, whether it's variety. Just a matter of sort of probably benchmarking against varieties and fields in question. So if we can move on to the next slide, it'll probably make more sense. So yeah, here we are again, forecasting. Can we use our field health maps and other data which we're collecting to look at our crop prior to harvest, quite some time prior to harvest, because this one was back in February time, to a yield map on the right hand side, which you can clearly see the correlation between the maps. And do we look at these areas and what do we do? Do we rob the rich to give to the poor, or do we sort of look at other way of managing? So if we could go on to the next slide, this is some of the work we've been doing. So we look at targeting applications. Obviously, we're still on the same field. The bottom left-hand slide is the Yara N sensor applying a variable rate application to the field. This is done in real time, so it's not using any NDVI maps or any other data apart from collecting biomass maps, looking at the biomass of the crop in the field at time of application. And you can see it does fairly well correlate to the NDVI as well. And then you look to the right hand side where we've also looked at using variable rate PGR applications, and this was done using an NDVI map, actually using another piece of software last spring and summer. So you know, we're using the data, or using the data we're collecting in different ways. Some of it in real time, and some of it, you know, after the event, we're sort of getting the maps and putting the data down and obviously doing the jobs afterwards. So we move on to the next one. So then we come on to the same field again. This is the piece of software we're again using. And maybe what we need to do is, obviously we're creating this data, we're using the data to create applications, whether it be variable rate seeding or fertilizer, or spray applications. And on the left hand side here, we sort of you can look at various regions of the field in real time. It's quite easy to do, and you can look and see what have you put on the field. It could be fertilizer, it could be looking at a yield map, and then it will give you the average of the area. So you can compare different areas or the same areas depending on what applications you've got. And on the right hand side, you can see shall we say, a higher nitrogen rate, but actually it gave a slightly lower yield. I don't think we can look too closely in there, but this is what I was talking about, robbing the rich to pay the poor. The end sensor, I feel, does a very good job at balancing that out, and obviously an application later in the season would have then reduced the amount in the lower yielding areas and kept it where it needed to be in the higher areas. So you know, that's where I think we need to be with our evaluation, is using this data and evaluating it afterwards, and we need some sort of software to do that. So I think that's a way forward for us.
Kind of linked to that, Andrew's asked, do you think that by planting the crop by a variable rate seed map makes the need for variable fertilizer application less effective?
Quite possibly. Obviously, you're looking at an end sensor to even the crop up, but I don't think in any variable rate applications do we completely make a field, you know, the same across the whole board. So I still think we need all of these systems in place to get the sort of the final outcome we're looking at. And even then, it's not perfect, but I think it's a good way forward.
And James, you're doing some variable rate kind of work, aren't you? Would you have you analysed it to this extent, or looked at kind of what it's showing at the beginning of the season and your final yields? Or
yeah, we've used the satellite imagery, and it's amazing how early, or satellite imagery against yield maps, previous yield maps, and it's amazing what we've found is how early you can sort of see that yield coming. So if you were to look at a biomass map now, and you put a yield map next to it, you can nearly correspond the two together this early, which, you know, I always thought it was sort of later on in the season, sort of May, June, April, May time, that's where the yield was coming from.
and do you think that's the last couple of years, or do you think that, you know, have you noticed that over quite a long time?
Well, we've only been sort of satellite imagery for the last two, so it's hard to sort of say previous to that. But no, I think it's the soil rather than necessarily what we put on it is some of it as well. So it's how we can improve that soil structure or put something onto that soil to improve it, to make it perform.
Would you agree with that, Andrew and Sam? Have you noticed kind of similar correlations when you've looked back at this?
Yeah, I think we haven't done it for that long either, really, have we? But...
No, NDVI has been in its early days for us, but yeah, so I think it's quite amazing. You can see these sort of correlations are quite early on.
Yeah.
And it's just how we're going to tweak the inputs to try and do what we can to try and bring, whether it's bring the high yielding areas up or spend less on low areas.
I think that's a big question.
How we do that.
Without our crystal ball of what the weather's going to do, it's hard to know which bit you push, isn't it? So a question from Charlie here. Did you, Andrew and Sam, variably apply the fungicide along with a PGR? They think it makes a lot of sense, but there seems to be a bit of hesitation, reluctance from some agronomists to kind of try that. Is that something that you did as well, or did you just do the PGR?
I did. The PGR was actually a growth stage 30. I think it was a growth stage 35 to 37 terpel. I was a bit apprehensive about applying a fungicide at the same time. Obviously, last year I was still applying Bravo CTL, so we could still apply that. So I did actually add that to the tank with the PGR. So I felt that obviously probably limited variation. across the field, so it's probably not going to make a big difference. And using the technology which we had and still got at the moment, we couldn't vary the rate massive amounts. You obviously only got a variation within your nozzle tolerances. Obviously, with the new technology which is coming forward now, there's some major changes where you can obviously increase the rates of application using a spray nozzle in the future.
Yeah, big technology coming. Just one last question from Quentin, saying, Sam, maybe you want to answer this one. Would you confirm if the soil texture map zones differed to how you'd have drawn the areas based on historic field knowledge? And I think we think that proportion of the people that are paper-based, did the EC scans kind of give you any different knowledge to what you've got already, or trying to change the practices that you're using?
I don't think they would really, because we kind of know our fields in general. Maybe the deep texture was a little bit different, but I don't think you could tell a massive difference, could you?
No, not a massive difference. I mean, we probably, maybe we could draw these onto online on maps on our software, but I just think it can pick a few different things out, but I still think it's an easier exercise to sort of have it done as a scan rather than a sort of manual plotting on the fields.
And I guess the advantage of doing the EC scanning is you only do it once, don't you? You've then got that layer forever, like you say. It doesn't change.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
nice.
And you go back and ground truth the areas and the zones, if you like, to put some sort of fact to the maps. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, do you want to do your next slide?
Okay, this is just really to sort of finish off. Really, we're looking at how we can evaluate trials going forward. So this happens to be a fertilizer trial coming for this season, which is a polysulfate trial. So we're looking at applying this fertilizer to a section of the middle of the field. It's going to be in tramline zones. So the idea of this slide is really just to show how you can map those tram lines very easily using the software. And then from there on, you've got this region or zone of the field, which you can then come back and evaluate compared to the rest of the field, whether it be yield data, application data, or any other data which you add to it. So as far as this goes, I think this is a way forward for us. We've done farm trials before with different applications of pesticides, or mainly trace elements and that type of biostimulants. And I think this could be a way of analysing the data on farm in tramline trials, and then you can look at the background data, whether it be NDVI or other yield data you've got from previous years, to make sure you're probably putting the trials in the correct place to get a fair comparison across the field. So it's basically for evaluation, I feel, is no point putting a tramline trial in the wrong part of the field and getting the wrong answer. So I think it's a good way for us to.
It's really moved us forward in the way we're looking at putting trials in, isn't it? And it does make a big difference. The data in it's actually really accurate as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant.
I think is there any more slides?
I've got one more, I think. Yeah.
One more slide? Okay, sorry. Sorry, just to finish off, weather data. Weather is important for everybody. We have a couple of weather stations now ourselves. We've had for a couple of years now this type of weather station. And I just bought this package, which is disease forecasting, just to have a little look to see what it could give us. I haven't actually used the data for applications at present, but I pulled these up the other week, and you can see from 2019, this is for Septoria, you can see sort of risk of infections quite numerous occasions across there. Obviously it's in hindsight, obviously, or at the time, so it's easy to look at everything afterwards. You go to last year, 2020, ourselves, we did have a lower Septoria incidence last year. It was more on the yellow rust, so you can see a big difference there, I feel. So can we use this in future to do disease risk for fungicide applications? Can we, not saying reduce it down completely, but can we then use it more as a protectant spray because we know the data which we've had, or the weather we're forecasting we've had to that date. So it's it's not saving lots of money, but it may be a way of using this data to be a little bit more confident and what applications you make, whether it has to be for erraticant reasons in the latent period, which you can't see before it expresses itself, or whether it's what it gives us. So I just thought it'd be an interesting slide to show, and it's something we shall definitely use this next year and have a little play in the field and see whether we can actually use it a little bit more to guide our applications.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I think, you know, data is going to be, you know, we're mainly concentrating on kind of in-field data tonight, but data is going to be everywhere kind of going forwards, and particularly with integrated pest management, integrated kind of crop management, disease forecasting, I think it's going to be massive going forward. So yeah, it's which bits do you focus on and which do you concentrate on, and which are going to give you the biggest return going forward. So I've got lots of great questions coming in, and keep your questions coming in, guys. I think if we maybe move on to James, thank you, Andrew and Sam, and we'll kind of run through your bits, and then there's some great questions that kind of work across all of you as well. So yeah, keep your questions coming in and we'll ask them. But yeah, we'll hand over to James and Laura now, are going to talk us through their bit.
Yeah, if I could have the first slide, please. Yeah, so we changed the tractor about 4 years ago. We were RTK on the previous tractor, but it couldn't drive around the boundary. Where when we changed it, we got the 4600 screen, so we were able to drive the tractor around the boundary. So we decided to borrow a gator from a local dealership, which we put our Green Star dome on the top and our screen. We exported the field names to the screen, and then I drove around every field with the front bar on the front with a chain hanging. So that was a metre away from either the ditch line or the hedge line, which then brought the boundary in a metre. So we were covered for our cross compliance. And this was so that we could then draw our boundaries more accurate, so that for spraying, we weren't spraying our margins or drilling out, you know, we would get the full width of our margins and of our fields. And then also we found it, you know, at night, we couldn't go spraying like off when the wind was down after dark, because you couldn't judge from our margins to the outside of your sprayer, or early morning. So that's the reason we decided to do that one. Next slide, please. So here's a map. So once we'd done the boundaries, I then put them on a USB, and then we exported them out, and then I then passed the USB to Laura.
So I then took the USB, uploaded all the information into Gatekeeper, and from there we had a master file, so we always know how big the field is. We've got that sitting as one layer on Gatekeeper, and from there we then built in all of the other layers. So we put on there all of our countryside stewardship, so we know exactly which bits are margins, wild bird covers, etc. We can run a report off easily at the end of the year that will help the BPS and stewardship. We can cross-check that as well, just to make sure that we have actually got the allocated areas that we say that we have. And also it saves any operator from driving, because they use all the boundaries now in all of the tractors, from driving on the margins, because we noticed that certain margins were getting either too wide or too narrow in places. When doing that, we also imported the RPA boundaries, which is the blue line that you can see. And we wanted just to make sure that what we said the area was in Gatekeeper, what we were spraying it to and drilling it to, was actually the area. So that was one of our reasons for driving it with the GPS as well. So yeah, that's been really, really handy for that, for the compliance side, and for the guys being able to drive the boundaries any time of the day or night, really. So that was a big thing for us. Can we have the next slide, please?
Yeah, so we're also using the boundary not just for the field side of things, but also for the stewardship. So that where I'm there, that's a topper on the back there actually. So it just sort of happened that we went in the field and I was like, oh, we could use this again. So we just put it on the other side of the boundary and set the topper up. And then we're topping, so if I could have the next slide, please. Yeah, so we were finding that, you know, human just driving, you just wouldn't go right close to the crop in places. So we were then getting like either black grass or it just wouldn't look very neat, or a broad weed come through. So with the GPS now, that will actually drive right up against the drilling line or the spraying line, so it gets rid of any black grass or anything that might come in that first few inches. Next slide, please.
Just before you go on, John's really interested in how you've done your boundary mapping. Quite a good question here. Is anyone aware of any contractors doing this as a service they offer? I don't know. Is it something you do on your contract farms, James and Laura? Or have you kind of mainly prioritised doing it on your own farm? Is it something you've heard of other people doing?
We have done all of our contract farms now. Only they were quite happy for us to go ahead and do it, and we were quite confident that they'd be with us for quite a while, but we wouldn't go off and do it if it was like short term, would we?
Yeah, you'd only got it for it's quite a lot of work, but you do get a lot back from it. So you want to try and be in it for the long haul to get your time of doing it back, if you like. But we've just taken on one this summer, which we've got for a while. So I've literally just driven around the boundaries a couple of weeks ago with the gator, and they're now sitting in gatekeeper as the grey area. So our next job is to then decide where we're going to put because they're actually in the scheme, but they want to change a few things. So we've now just got to sit down and decide where they're going to be changed to, and then draw them on.
Yeah, it is very time consuming at the beginning. So yeah, you'd want to make sure that you'd got the farm for quite a few years, really.
That's interesting. Is that anything you've done like that, Andrew and Sam, as well? Kind of.
The data we use, we do RTK all of our boundaries, but from that, we for the sort of croppable side of the field, we're using our tram lines are always in the same place every year, so we call them track zero. So we have our sort of spraying lines all in the same place. So it you know, once we've got them there, they're there for good, which is obviously better for travelling on tram lines during the season without sort of moving a compaction across the field.
We have done a bit of contracting work for boundaries, but it's not anything we've then carried on into the gatekeeper side of things. We've done the donkey work, should I say, of just doing it and then passed it on to whoever wanted it to actually do the hard part, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it something that you wouldn't go back from now, kind of, James and Laura, now that you've got it? Do you find that you're using more and more, like you say, even that kind of the other advantages you haven't seen before, you know, being able to go late at night or know you're in that same place?
Yeah, definitely. And also because we now direct drill probably a good third to half of the farm, we're finding it's like when you're on direct drilled to see your marker on, especially on your headland, it's impossible. Where now with this auto steer with the guidance and the boundary, you don't have to even, you know, I don't even put the marker out. You can literally just drive around that boundary and that will drive to the, you know, as long as you put your right distances in for your tractor and your drill and everything, that will line up a tree. So we have found it's a lot easier, and just steering around, you know, before you were trying to judge, you know, 12 meters, so if you're on a 24 meter sprayer, trying to judge 12 meters away from your margin was just, like nearly impossible or hard. So yes, get rid of all of that.
I think it's good from a compliance point of view as well. We haven't really got to worry about it now. We know that like the margins are what they say they should be, whereas before we really were shocked at how much they varied really.
And there's a question here linked to that from Charlie about, was there a big difference between the gator boundaries that you captured and the previous RTK drilling boundaries? Was there much difference in the end, or?
Yeah, so previous boundaries that we had in was literally just me driving around with the tractor rather than a gator, or so it was, I'd say it was more of a guide rather than an actual boundary, if you like. So because we couldn't steer them anyway, which then did help for obviously yield data coming in and everything else, because we needed a boundary in. But yeah, these are, you know, sometimes I actually get out and just make sure, and I've had a tape measure with me, and you are a meter. So if you want a meter cross compliance, it is exactly a meter.
Yeah, and that's a big difference. I'm going to ask you one more. James has just said, have you found a way to use RPA boundaries to set up the field boundary, because the RPA have got the hedges logged as well? I don't know if you thought that was a consideration.
Yeah, we've got the RPA layer on there, but literally just as a guide. We had to choose which one we were going to follow, either the RPA or the gatekeeper. So we went with ours with the gator. It was handy. It was really good for the hedges, and it helped to draw, because we've drawn all the hedges on and bits and pieces like that as well. So it was definitely a help.
That's great. Cool. Do you want to do your next ones then, James and Laura? There's great questions coming in. I'll keep going.
Can you go back quite a moment? Sorry.
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, we changed the combine, which was then enabling us to do yield data, which we were quite keen on trying and doing. So we've got data previously, so every field goes over, we weighbridge every load that comes in goes over a weighbridge, and we keep every field separate. So we've got that, so we know what every field has done previously, but we just didn't know exactly the areas of that field it was like doing better or worse. So that's the reason we went to yield data, and then it just sort of progressed from that as to where we were. But we're using it for variable rate seeding, so we're doing variable rate seeding, and it's quite useful for that. So you can look at previous yields and then do trials. So we've actually, you know, we were taking seed off the good areas and putting on some of the not so good areas. And my worry was, is that part of the field that was yielding good going to then suffer for taking that seed off? So we did like a sort of 24-meter trials across the field, which we did sort of every other one. And actually we found by taking, as long as we didn't do too much, by taking the seed off the good area and putting on the bad, actually improved the bad and didn't actually lower the yield of the good part. So at least we knew, you know, that we weren't suffering on the better parts of the field, if you like.
And then the way that we analyse the yield, which I find quite interesting, you can run different map layers. You can look into it into different amounts of detail. So when I get the USB data off of the combine, I save the data, then pop it straight into Gatekeeper, and we will then use all of the paper weighbridge tickets to calibrate each field. And then we run several, so we run a filter just to take out any odd plots that aren't accurate. And then we've got 2 layers set up that we tend to use. So this first one, we'll just literally look at it into 4 different categories. We can quickly look over it and see like the good and the bad, which is great for a quick glance when we just want to have a quick look through it. And then if there's an area that we want to look into more detail, if we could go on to the next slide, please. We've got a higher range so that we can look right down over it, and it will just show us a lot more in depth, really. And that's why we also print it off now on 2 maps per page. So you've got the actual plots up the top, and then you've got the nice pretty, you know, it's mapped at the bottom, and it shows the data a little bit easier. And we found that was really interesting as well, so that we can actually look at the raw data as well. So that's been really, really, really helpful. We have the next slide, please.
Yeah, so this is sort of talking more on sort of handheld devices, etc. This is actually a soil app that I've got on my phone, and we can map blackgrass areas or things like that with it. And then I sort of thought, well, actually, we could probably use it for our drain outlets. So this is just an example. We've done every field now like this. We've marked them with a white marker post, and while we were doing that, I went out with my phone and just marked where the drain outlets were, and then I've PDF'd them back to the computer. So we've got a hard copy and a folder in the office. So if we want to go and check any, we know where they are. Or just you can bring that up on your phone and you can walk down the ditch. And I've found this year that that's within sort of 2 or 3 foot of where the actual outlet is. So if you're struggling to find one, it's so helpful just to quickly bring it up, and you can print them out and just show them to like a digger driver or something so that he knows where they are.
We've also uploaded, we're in the process of it, I think we've scanned about 90 old maps into Gatekeeper, and we're putting on all of the old drainage maps. That is quite time consuming. I reckon we're probably 70% of the way there. But it's been really handy because then we can also layer it upon the yield maps. So if we've got a consistent problem, we can kind of just see if there's any problems with the drains. And also just to make sure that James has picked up all of the actual drains, drain outlets. So we've found a few, haven't we, from the old maps. So it was handy having both as well. So yeah, that's been beneficial. If we could have the next slide, please. And then we like to look at the gross margin maps just to see where the money is actually being spent and what's going on the field. Again, there's different layers, but we try and keep it fairly simple, just looking at you know, maybe 4 or 5, having the key set to 4 or 5 different brackets. With all of that, when we are putting our costs in, we also make sure that we split them as well if we need to. Certain operations, mould draining, we split it down over.
I think we went 5 or 7 years, 6 years. I think we went mold draining.
Some of the other bits.
Yeah, so liming, for instance, when we're putting lime on.
So we make sure that all of the costs are split over the appropriate years, so it's not all being lumped in one. And we just make sure that we've got all of like the actual costs going in, right down to we're part of a in a farm buying group, so we make sure that we can charge per hectare for that. So that all gets added back onto a field by field level. Anything that we can tie back to the field that we do pop it straight into Gatekeeper so that it makes its way back, because it is a true cost at the end of the day and it could quite easily just get lost. Yeah, I think that's us.
Brilliant. And you're looking at developing that, aren't you, James and Laura? Now you've got kind of, did you say you've got 7 years of yield mapping? I think you've got a folder with it all there and you're kind of looking at bringing it all together. Do you envisage kind of creating one of these for each field, you know, over the rotation going forwards as well?
Yeah, so that's the plan. We've got a folder for every year, and also in that folder we've put rainfall in. We've also put a PV panel data in there so that we know when it was sunny, when it was cloudy, so that we can use the sunlight as a guide, so we know whether it was, you know, time of year, what sort of season we had, because in 5 years time we're going to forget, you know, what the season was, whether it was a dry spring, wet winter, and also we're putting in, you know, whether it was direct drilled, you know, what cultivations has done in that field, so that, you know, we've always got a
want to be trying to predict really where we are the next year really on the data that we've got, so we do try and use it. It's not a case of just kind of get it and chuck it in a folder really. So yeah, we are trying to pull it all together really.
And I guess that's the thing that, like, in some ways a map doesn't tell you, does it? It doesn't tell you whether the headland's bad because it was compacted or because it was pigeons or rabbits or, you know, because something else happened, you know, and that's the kind of the value of doing it. Andrew and Sam, what's your technique for, or have you started to collect the data and waiting to see where you go?
Yes, well, obviously we've got quite a lot of yield data. With various changes of combines and various things, we haven't got complete sets of data for some of the older years. The last few years that's been better, so that's I think it's going to be a great piece of information there going forward. But like I say, bringing all this information together is very important. So I know that's what people want to look at. So we haven't done much of the gross margin maps yet. I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle to put together as well, to look at the different areas of the field to see what, obviously, especially with variable rate technology, with the different applications we're making. I think that's an important part to look at, drill down to the margin at the end of the day, which is what we're looking at, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I have got a lot of fantastic questions here, and I think I might take a chair's thing and say, I know it's kind of 2 minutes to 8, but we've had people saying this is one of the best webinars they've done because it's packed full of practical information, and I think based on that I'm going to take another 15 minutes just to whiz through some of these questions, if that's okay with everybody. If you do need to leave us now, the session will be recorded and you can watch it back, but there's some really brilliant questions coming in here and I want to hear what you all say for them. So I think I'm going to start off with a question from Billy here, which I think is one that probably a lot of people are thinking. So for a family farmer who does all the farm work inside and out, how could they prioritise the data management if they're limited for time? Because time's a big thing, and you've both kind of said how much time's involved. You know, what would you prioritise, Andrew?
Something I've given a lot of thought to, because over the past quite a few years now we've been sort of bringing in various bits of data, and I have to say, not always has the data made it to the right places all of the time. Something gets left and think I'll do that when it's a rainy day or in the winter time. One way forward of looking at it maybe is to you know, we're starting to use professionals to you know, to look at sort of financial data, whether it's a way forward to use someone to help you manage that data, or whether there's some software, like say we're looking at to try and streamline the information, how to bring it in. So we're finding now we can bring data in so much easier without any sort of input from ourselves to sort of bring the data in the first place. And then once the data is there, then we can then analyze it at our leisure a little bit more, rather than just leaving it on a USB stick or not bringing it in. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to decide which is the best way forward, but getting the data is important, and we all need to, you know, if we've got this data, we need to bring it in. But then obviously at some point we need to do something with it. So obviously save the data first, and then take it from there, really.
Brilliant. James, your thought on that?
Probably a big one for us was our costings, actually. Like, even though they were in Gatekeeper, they weren't as accurate as I'd say as what they are now, or the last 5 years, because it all leads on, if you like. That's sort of a stepping stone. Like when we started yielding, we actually had to go back and for the previous year and make sure our costings were more accurate to get the yield map right, or the gross margin map right. So that's, you know, and then once you've got them in there, that's quite an important step. And you can really build it up from there, as to how far you want to go with it.
Yeah,
I think make sure that you've got all of your invoices in, and just kind of try and be thorough with that, so that you can actually see exactly what you are spending. Because I think it's quite easy to think, oh, okay, that one doesn't really relate to it, I won't worry about it maybe as much. But I think you need to be thorough with that, making sure that all the costs are actually there to start with.
Yeah, yeah, so true. Harry, have you got anything to add to that? Because I know it's something, you know, it's that dynamic, isn't it? Have you got something to add to that?
I think it was, I think you beat me to it, really. I was wondering whether listeners were going to start thinking whether these guys have any time for farming when they've entered all of this data in. But you know, you've answered that well. The question I'd like to get across, and I think it's probably hidden in the questions with you, Teresa, is connectivity. Is that getting bottomed out now? So the desktop software will speak to the class, and the John Deere and the Fend and all the other bits and pieces. Is it all getting bottomed out now, do you think?
I mean, for us, things are a lot better, and I think they are for lots of different manufacturers out there. Like I said, wireless data transfer for us was probably one of the big stepping stones, even though we was collecting at USB. So hard sometimes with all the other day-to-day management things and obviously jobs out on the farm you've got to do, to be able to bring that straight into the office and know it's sitting there in the cloud for when you want it, for us was one of the changing points for us.
James?
Yeah, so yeah, with New Holland Combine, though most of our other things are John Deere, but we're using my John Deere a little bit. But to be honest with you, because of Gatekeeper, there's no point really having two lots of data in two places. So, but I know we have done it one season. We put the New Holland data from the yield into my John Deere, but we tend to use Gatekeeper as our sort of main hub. It just works for us, really.
So just on that point, you could use a New Holland Combine with my John Deere, and that would work satisfactorily.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. It's important. We haven't mentioned this, Teresa, but it's important to note that other manufacturers are available. We just seem to be a little bit pro one manufacturer at the minute, but that's the way it is. But yeah, certainly it's, you know, if you want to go to your own dealership and press them for the answers, then that's what we want to equip you guys to do.
It is, and you know, there are so many different options out there, and I know Andrew and Sam, you know, you've been looking at different platforms to use and taking those, and you know, James and Laura as well, and kind of making the most of the platforms you are paying for and you are using. So a question just to kind of develop, because there are a lot of questions, Harry, well done on that. Kind of what about trying to work out which platform you use, and if you don't want to be locked in by manufacturers and kind of companies in the future? I think that's quite a good question. Of, you know, so say you decide you want to use X platform now, but technology is moving on. Have you got any thoughts on how you're managing that, or kind of collecting the data for long term?
I mean, we're just evaluating data, what different platforms which are out there. My goal really, or our goal really, is to have one platform where all of the data can come into. I mean, we use Gatekeeper for our day-to-day, you know, record inputs. It does everything, Gatekeeper really, but it's very hard to actually, unless you're an expert like Laura is, it's harder to make it completely work for you. But I know it's speaking from my personal experience, but I just think data analysis going forward is going to be important. So it's finding something where you can analyze the data easily and quickly.
The more often it'll get used, won't it? If the quicker and easier it is, like especially when you're out in the field, just being able to quickly look at specific areas and bits of data, it'll just get used a lot more often, in my opinion.
Whatever that platform may be, whether it's Gatekeeper or another one, but I think you've got to try and find one that works for you, and then try and use it for everything really, to try and bring the data in if that's what you want to do.
Good. I'm going to ask a slightly different question now, but I think a really interesting one. There's a couple of questions here about A, what's made the biggest impact on increasing your margin, and B, you know, how much does the cost of the investment of the technology play a part on the uptake? And I think the two are potentially related. You might tell me otherwise, but James, do you have a feeling on that?
Yeah, I think probably one of our biggest things is direct drilling now. That's, you know, we've actually found, obviously it's cheaper, or establishment cost is cheaper, and our actual soils are benefiting from it. And you know, without GPS, we could do it, but it's a lot easier because, you know, if you're going for a cover crop, for instance, or anything like that. So that's probably, and then obviously we can then now look at each field, say, well, that was direct drilled, that wasn't. It's had the same applicants, and see what the yield stroke costings has been as to whether, you know, we're not just chasing yield now, it's cost of production as well as yield, if you like. It's not, we don't look at, I'm now looking more at cost of production than I am necessarily yield. I don't want to drop my yields, but they go hand in hand, if you like.
And similarly, Sam, you know, if you've got a smaller acreage out there and you want to make these kind of data things make a margin, what would you say? Has there one that's given you a bigger payback over something else?
I don't know really if you can easily say if one's more beneficial, because it literally is circumstantial, but you can easily spend quite a lot of money without knowing exactly what you want. Sometimes, can't you? You can get swamped by it. So it's kind of, I don't know the best way to put it really.
Yeah,
a bit of a hard one.
Sorry, I'm not very good on the answers on that one, sorry.
Well, now I'm going to ask Harry a harder one. And what's a fair cost, Harry, for precision farming software? Give that one to Harry.
Blimey, how much do you want to go? I think it's, I was thinking about what, if Andrew was struggling to answer the question, but it's as, I think it's a dip your toe and keep dipping your toe, and it's if you've got, I mean, 68% of the listeners have got guidance, and there's a fair bet that guidance technology has the capacity to do some mapping, and so just keep building on it. And you know, it's fairly well understood that the guidance gives you a good return on investment with accurate bout widths. If you can add when the time comes, the spreader or the sprayer, or can you get countryside productivity grants to update your spreader or sprayer and start recording what you're doing? So as James and Laura were saying, just start recording it, just start putting it in the background. You're not going to get too many answers from 1 year's worth of data, but you'll start to get more value once you do a whole rotation. As for cost, yeah, I was speaking to a chap in Yorkshire, and to fit yield mapping to a New Holland TX34 was about £4,500. So you could get your maps. So yeah, you've got your combine. You could fit a 15, 20-year-old combine with yield mapping and set yourself going. And I think it's dipping your toe, feeling your way, adding technology as you go. The key thing is, I think, that it always is able to download it back to a software program, and that's you don't have to. I think we're getting away from the need to invest in a whole block of technology that's going to last you 2 or 3 years, and then something moves on and 5G comes along and more data wireless transfer comes along. I think that's calming down really in the development of it. So hopefully this, that you should see a beyond a 5-year into 10-year lifespan of the technology that you're buying at the moment.
Good. So building on that, I'm just going to ask this question. I've got some technical ones I don't know if we're going to get to, but maybe I ask you. But Sam's asking, which I think is a really good one, and I think for those that were still paper-based at the beginning and thinking about how they're doing it, what are you missing now that you wish you had to be able to do more with the data? Is there anything that you kind of, in your folder of stuff, James and Laura, that you kind of think actually, if I'm looking at my yield maps in the next 7 years, what I should be recording or what I'd like to have? Is there something there, James, Laura?
I haven't actually thought, for next year we want to be recording that. We've probably gone a little bit over the top, as in I'd rather record it and not use it than not record it and need it, if you like. So for instance, I think because we can now remember what the seasons were like a little bit for the last sort of 4 or 5 years, but it's when you get extra years or the next generation, I'm trying to make it as a good data bank, not just for us, but family farm, hopefully for the next generation to improve things as well as us.
But also the first year we didn't record the weather, so that came in the second year when we thought about it, because we looked back at the first year's folder, and yeah, like you say, we wish we had it at the time. Going through the folder, there's a few little notes here and there as well. Maybe there was a field that was mould or had drainage, and that had got a slightly part of the field hadn't yielded as well, so there's a note on there that there was drainage. So we do make notes. Everything is printed and it's all PDF'd as well. So we've kind of got a copy sitting in the farm office, but also backed up as well. And we also keep the raw USB data as well, just in case we ever did decide to go with another software. We do keep all of that as well. So we could ultimately upload that as well in years to come.
Brilliant. And I'm going to ask the same question. I love, James and Laura, that you're so into your technology and everything, but it's still got to be printed and in a folder. There, just you got your hands on it, and you can still use a pen and paper and write it down. The old things still work well, don't they? Andrew and Sam, a piece of data that you might wish you had, or that you're looking at bringing in.
To be fair, I think James and Laura pretty much covered it. One thing we're probably not as good as what we should be is recording those smaller bits of data which go like with a yield map, like certain areas of the field we can remember in the season and maybe we can remember in the next. If we're going to analyze this data, we need to either use the software in the program to analyze it that year to pull out the important parts of the data and make sure we make it all correct for the field, or we need to make sure, like James and Laura are doing, we're adding that data in a paper or electronic PDF format, so you can look back over your data over the years. And I think that's a really important piece of information to have. Just look back at your data with notes to go with your electronic format as well. Sorry, it's more of a repeat, but it's very true.
Well, it's important, isn't it? And actually the repeat's as important as anything that you've all said. It's it's keeping it all together and having that prompt, because actually in 3 years, are you going to remember? Well, there's some years that we're going to forget in terms of weather and yields, aren't there? So we might not want to remember it in a few years' time. Cool. I mean, there's some brilliant questions in here, and maybe, guys, I can kind of come back to you and, suggestions about free technology. What 3 words to do your kind of train ends, which is a good idea. I know lots of people use that, saying my John Deere is kind of free. There's some technology that you might actually be getting, and I know there's a lot of dealers that say, like lots of the telematics data that you've pulled off there, Sam, you can get it, but people aren't taking the time and looking at it. And I guess that's quite a lot. We talk about the margin, there's all the stuff you can pay for, but there's making the most of the bits that you are paying for already as well. So I think we'll probably call it round there. Harry, we've got the final question here, haven't we? The original question. Do you want to pose that to our panel today?
I think we've largely got there, but I suppose the ending question starts with the first one. Really, is it saving you time or is it costing you time? Going to go have a go at that, Sam and Andrew?
I think it's definitely saving us time. Unless you go deep into certain bits which probably aren't necessary in the long run, it is definitely saving us time with bringing data in easily, and just it gets processed fairly easily as well.
I mean, it takes time, don't get me wrong, there is a time involved, but I think we need to make that part of our farming structure. You know, we have to do data recording for crop records anyway, generally. So, you know, we need to just spend a little bit more time bringing this data in, and I think that there's some savings to be made, whether it's in application costs, whether it's in input costs, whatever it may be. I think it's very important that we do spend that bit of time, and there is a benefit in your margin at the end of the day. It may take time to get it, but I think it's well worth it.
James, Laura, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. It does take a lot of time, but I think it's important. It's made it easier for us to make planning and financial decisions. Like we had to look at a field, for argument's sake, last year and work out where we needed to put an extra piece of stewardship. And it was great being able to have the maps and to be able to layer them and look and see which part of the field wasn't really that profitable, which made more sense to put it into a stewardship, that part. And then from your point of view, it's easy for you guys to be able to spray whenever you need to. Yeah, so it's more efficient, I suppose, for the guys outside as well.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that, James?
No, literally, yeah, the mapping the boundary was, yeah, that's well worth doing. One, so that if we get an inspection, I know that they're all, you know, we can literally just pass them the information and say, well, this is all mapped on our software, tractors drive to it, and then if I've checked them and, you know, they are absolutely spot on with a tape measure, so, you know,
And you can go
I haven't got any worries.
Time of the night, don't you?
Yeah, so literally before you were getting up in the morning thinking, oh, the wind's down, but I've got to wait till it's daylight to go, where now you can go day or night. You know, some of our spraying off now, we're doing at night just so because daytime's too windy, and you can just keep going and you haven't got to worry.
Brilliant. There's a couple of things. One, we haven't mentioned contract farming, and there's something I was meant to mention earlier, you know, and kind of justifying and working out how much you might want to charge and those kind of things. And I guess, you know, that will come in helpful. And like you say, the kind of marginal land and elms. I know when we say about kind of Alan Brighton that we work with a kind of business coach, and he always says about kind of £10 an hour jobs, £100 an hour jobs, and £1,000 an hour jobs. And I guess, you know, with what you were saying, Andrew and Sam, and I think Harry at the beginning, you're going out and you're doing these jobs and you're collecting the data, and do we need to take the time maybe to do the £100,000 an hour jobs and reflect and use them for the future? So yeah, good on you all. Thank you very much. So we'll just do the last couple of notices at the end as we go through. A poll. Go on then, let's do a quick poll. All those of you that have listened in tonight, after today, you know, what are you going to do based on today? Are you just going to get started with collecting your data? Are you going to analyse your yield maps? Are you going to do your variable rate applications, or, you know, analyse that, bring some existing data together, or maybe something else? And if it's something else, pop it in the chat box and let me know. So if you want to pop that in, what have we inspired you to do tonight?
I'll just say, in the interest of balance, it was the guy that gave me the price for the combine yield mapping was Clive Blacker for a New Holland. So just in the interest of balance, because it's been a John Deere heavy evening. So
thanks, Harry. Good. Okay, Christian, if we can have a look at this and see what we've inspired on a Monday evening. We're going to, a lot of you are going to get started with collecting your data, inspired you to do that. A lot of you are going to bring existing data together, look at yield maps, and a few, just something else, try something a bit different. We've had some fantastic kind of field feedback kind of through. Andrew's going to map his boundaries better. Yeah, various different people. So everybody's really appreciated what you've shared tonight, James and Laura. And Andrew and Sam. So if we just kind of go on, there's a couple of quick things to mention before we finish tonight. The first thing is data in AHDB. It's really interesting. Lots of people have said just how brilliant they found the kind of practical side of tonight. I think it's quite hard to do research on, in some ways, Harry, isn't it? But you very much got Harry here as your kind of technical go-to person if you've got these kind of questions and we can help in any way from AHDB, and Jim, who's our resource management scientist as well from that side. There's also some other resources Christian, on the next slide. Oh, in terms of the Monitor Farm survey, it's something we'd normally do at the end of our kind of Monitor Farm season this time of year. We're still really keen on doing this, and for you all to feedback how you found the webinar sessions that you've been on, what this kind of style of delivery is like for you, and we would really appreciate if you could take a couple of times, if you just Google Monitor Farm survey and take a couple of minutes to fill that in and let us know. As of Boris's announcements today, we're all planning on what we might not be able to do in the summer. Hopefully we can be out on farm and see what you're all doing in person, but we're really interested to hear whether this style of delivery works for you or what you're desperate to get out and see around that gator as you top the edges, see if the edges are, get the tape measure out, and James and Laura or Andrew come and have a look at that trial and see how that yields. We'll be interested to hear from you. Okay, Christian. We've got 2 more Monitor Farm Mondays left. We're going into March, one about lean management, which will be brilliant next week. Something that's done a lot in dairy and pork sector, and not so much in our sector. So that's one well worth tuning into. And then the final one of the season is about cover crops and intercropping and companion cropping, and taking some of those soil health questions forward. So the links will all come out to you for those. And as I say, the recordings for all of them are available on our YouTube channel, on our website as well. So we're in Milling Week this week. So if any of you are Milling Week growers out there, hopefully you've picked up on this. We've got 3 sessions, 1 o'clock tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday, looking at kind of technical insights, announcing the End Week Quality Awards, and looking at supply chain issues. And then we've got the United Oilseeds conference, which is happening on Friday morning as well. And then as of next week, we're into Carbon Week, and this is looking at some of the questions you might have in terms of carbon, the calculators to use, the reasons for doing it, how it works on an arable farm and a grassland farm, and yeah, kind of well worth logging into those sessions. Again, all the information is available on our website or at the link there. So I think just to wrap up tonight, the session has been recorded. If you want to have a look back, please do. If you want to ask James and Laura or Andrew and Sam or Harry any questions, like I say, their Twitter handles are all there, or feel free to drop me an email and I can pick that up with them as well. You will get a survey as you leave tonight. If you feel like dropping back and letting us know what you thought, please do. We're always interested in what you're hearing and what you're interested in hearing more of. But I think just a massive thank you from me to you, Andrew and Sam, for sharing all of what you're doing and making you do that number crunching, Sam. I hope kind of inspired you to do a bit more with your telematics, and we look forward to hearing what the future is in terms of that, and your disease forecasting. James and Laura, for sharing us your insights. I think it's really interesting what you've done and the real benefits that you've had, the tangible benefits. I look forward to seeing how those gross margin maps develop going forwards. And to Harry, thank you as always for chairing alongside me and asking those questions. So thank you all for your discussion. Good to have you all with us, and we'll see you again soon. Take care.